I was inspired now to revisit on Her Majesty's Secret Service after claiming there'd be no more James Bond videos. This is a good one, though. Its defenders are right. If it weren't for Lazenby, if this starred Connery, it'd be considered one of or the best Bond film ever. Director Peter R. Hunt had been an editor prior, and for the Bond films. And his film is composed with the editing room in mind, and so what results is an interesting prototype for, and actually more coherent than, 2000s, early 21st century tendencies in fight scene editing, as though the Bourne movies. The snow sequences are just spellbinding, and James Bond in the snow became a staple of this series, all originating here. Lazenby is actually pretty good in the role if you decide to give him a chance. My grandfather claims to have known Lazenby or had met him when he was selling cars in Australia. Lazenby could have continued in the role and been far more well considered than he is now, having left it immediately afterward. Diamonds Are Forever may have been terrible for whoever starred in it, as Connery's presence suggests. Actually, Christopher Nolan's favourite Bond film is this one, apparently, and the inspiration for the snow sequence is in Inception, some of that film's most memorable action work. Otherwise, what we get in on Her Majesty's Secret Service is a conscious attempt to avoid the gadget, pulpy approach of Goldfinger or You Only Live Twice, and to stay closer to her From Russia With Love. I got the impression recently that Thunderball was possibly an attempt to scale back somewhat after Goldfinger, although the jetpack at the start of that film, totally inconsistent with the rest of it, betrays an embrace of Goldfinger's absurdities, though the rest of the film is stylistically like a remake of Dr. No. Terence Young preserved the tone of the first two films, I would suggest. Peter R. Hunt had done the same on Her Majesty's Secret Service. It even has a moment worthy of 1967 Casino Royale's estimable strangeness. You like chickens, I like chickens. That brainwashing moment with the lights and the hypnotizing recording, that's so ruthlessly odd. Yeah, possibly the best Bond film. I mean, probably not better than From Russia With Love, or Dr. No, or even Casino Royale 67 or 06, in my inane opinion. Maybe even Thunderball, but this or Man with the Golden Gun, hard to say really. I used to assume this film was a reboot of sorts because Blofeld doesn't recognise Bond from You Only Live Twice, and I'm not sure if the film is implying Bond, as well as Blofeld, had plastic surgery, although one or two fourth wall jokes, this never happened to the other guy, betray that the film is not taking the idea of James Bond continuity all that seriously, so why ought we? Michael Reed's photography is very able, although I do wonder if Ted Moore, cinematographer of the first four films, or Freddie Young, who shot You Only Live Twice, not a really great demonstration of his talents though, would have been more ideal, although a part of me wouldn't change the look of this film whatsoever. Maybe a sharper, more vivid or sweeping, if possible. I mean, with Young, yeah, maybe. I don't know if I'd swap it for anything else. Until Casino Royale 2006, at 142 minutes, On Her Majesty's Secret Service was the longest Bond film. You know what, there's an argument to be made that it's the finest. Maybe not the finest, very close to it. Close to it. Here's what the contemporary reception of the film was like. The majority of reviews were critical of either the film, Lazenby, or both, while most of the contemporary reviews in the British press referred to George Lazenby at some point as the Big Fry, a reference to his previous acting in Fry's chocolate advertisements. Derek Malcolm of The Guardian was dismissive of Lazenby's performance, saying that he is not a good actor, and though I never thought Sean Connery was all that stylish either, there are moments when one yearns for a little of his louche panache. For all of the criticism of Lazenby, however, Malcolm says that the film was quite a jolly frolic in the familiar money-spinning fashion. Tom Milner, writing in The Observer, was even more scathing, saying that I fervently trust OHMSS will be the last of the James Bond films. All the pleasing oddities and eccentricities and gadgets of the earlier films have somehow been lost, leaving a routine trail through which the new James Bond strides without noticeable signs of animation. Donald Zeck in the Daily Mirror was equally damning of Lazenby's acting abilities, comparing him unfavourably to Connery. He looks uncomfortably in the part, like a size 4 foot in a size 10 gumboot. In yet another unfavourable comparison of Lazenby to Connery, Gene Siskel of the Chicago Tribune remarked that he doesn't fill Sean Connery's shoes, Aston Martin, or stretch pants. The new 007 is more boyish and consequently less of a man. He doesn't order food with the same verve, and generally lacks the self-satisfied smirk that Connery kept with him and transmitted to his audience. A.H. Wheeler of the New York Times also weighed in against Lazenby, saying that Lazenby, if not a spurious Bond, is merely a casual, pleasant, satisfactory replacement. Zek was kind to Lazenby's co-star, saying that there is style to Diana Rigg's performance, and I suspect that the last scene, which draws something of a performance out of Lazenby, owes much to her silken expertise. Siskel also wrote that Rigg is well cast as the girl, but we lose her for about an hour in the film, only to have her return in the most implausible location and time. One of the few supporters of Lazenby amongst the critics was Alexander Walker in the London Evening Standard, who said that the truth is that George Lazenby is almost as good a James Bond as the man referred to in his film as the other fellow. Lazenby's voice is more suave than sexy sinister, and he could pass for the other fellow's twin on the shady side of the casino. Bond is now definitely all set for the 70s. Judith Crist of New York also found the actor to be a strong point of the movie, stating that this time around there's less suavity and no-nonsense muscularity and maleness to the role via the hands of Mr. Lazenby. The feminist film critic Molly Haskell also wrote an approving review of the film in The Village Voice. In a world, an industry, and particularly a genre which values a new and improved product above all, it is nothing short of miraculous to see a movie which dares to go backward, a technological artifact which has nobly deteriorated into a human being. I speak of the new and obsolete James Bond, played by a man named George Lazenby, who seems more comfortable in a wet tuxedo than a dry martini, more at ease as a Donnish genealogist than reading or playing Playboy, and who actually dares to think that one woman who is his equal is better than 1,000 part-time playmates. Haskell was also affected by the film's emotional ending. The love between Bond and his Tracy begins as a payment and ends as a sacrament. After ostensibly getting rid of the bad guys, they are married. They drove off to a shocking, stunning ending. Their love, being too real, is killed by the conventions it defied, but they win the final victory by calling, unexpectedly, upon feeling. Some of the audience hissed. I was shattered. If you like your Bonds of happy endings, don't go. Modern reception of the film has seen a strong positive reversal to the point that many Bond connoisseurs have ranked it as their personal favourite, including multiple Academy Award winners and participants in a magazine fan poll. Film critic James Bradinelli summed this up in his review of the movie. With the exception of one production aspect, it is by far the best entry of the long-running James Bond series. The film contains some of the most exhilarating action sequences ever to reach the screen, a touching love story, and a nice subplot that has Agent 007 crossing and even threatening to resign from Her Majesty's Secret Service. Julia Sermons, writing in his Crime Reads, also regarded it as the best Bond film, highlighting its mix of romance, the strong Bond girl, its cheekiness, and Lazenby. The American film reviewer Leonard Maltin has suggested that if it had been Connery in the leading role instead of Lazenby, On Her Majesty's Secret Service would have epitomized the series. On the other hand, Danny Peary wrote, I'm not sure I agree with those who insist that if Connery had played Bond it would definitely be the best of the entire Bond series. Connery's Bond, with his boundless humour and sense of fun and self-confidence, would be out of place in this picture. It actually works better with Lazenby because he is incapable of playing Bond as a bigger-than-life hero. For one thing, he hasn't the looks. Lazenby's Bond also hasn't the assurance of Connery's Bond, and that it is appropriate in the crumbling, depressing world he finds himself. He seems vulnerable and jittery at times. At the skating rink, he's actually scared. We worry about him. On Her Majesty's Secret Service doesn't have Connery, and it's impossible to ever fully adjust to Lazenby, but I think that it still might be the best Bond film, as many Bond cultists claim. Peary also described On Her Majesty's Secret Service as the most serious, the most cynical, and the most tragic of the Bond films. Brian Fairbanks differed in his opinion of Lazenby, saying that the film gave us a James Bond capable of vulnerability, a man who can show fear and is not immune to heartbreak. Lazenby is that man, and his performance is superb. Fairbanks also thought On Her Majesty's Secret Service to be not only the best Bond, it is also the last truly great film in the series. In fact, had the decision been made to end the series, this would have been the perfect final chapter. The filmmaker Steven Soderbergh writes that, for me there's no question that cinematically On Her Majesty's Secret Service is the best Bond film, and the only one worth watching repeatedly for reasons other than pure entertainment. Shot to shot, this movie is beautiful in a way none of the other Bond films are. For director Christopher Nolan also stated, I've mentioned this, that On Her Majesty's Secret Service was his favourite Bond film. In describing its influence on his own film Inception 2010, Nolan said, what I liked about it that we've tried to emulate in this film is there's a tremendous balance in that movie of action and scale and romanticism and tragedy and emotion. Due to previous criticism, which has more recently seen it reappraised as one of the best, it has often been referred to as the most overlooked/underrated of the Bond movies. In September 2012, it was announced that On Her Majesty's Secret Service had topped a poll of Bond fans run by 007 magazine to determine the greatest ever Bond film. Goldfinger came second in the poll, and From Russia with Love was third. There you go, On Her Majesty's Secret Service. What a picture.